Have you ever had that eerie moment where you question whether your thoughts and decisions are really your own? Like, what if something invisible, something you can't see or touch, is quietly steering your actions, pulling strings behind the scenes, making you crave things you don't want to crave, making you do things that don't feel like you? That's addiction, and it's way more complex than just using drugs or alcohol. It's not just about a bad habit or a weak will. Addiction is a force that can literally reshape who you are. It can alter your brain, change your personality, and make you feel like a stranger to yourself. But here's the thing. Addiction isn't just about substances. Beneath every compulsion, every craving, every just one more moment, there's a deeper story. A story of the mind trying to survive, trying to escape something, trying to cope with pain. In today's video, we're diving deep into that story. We're going to explore the hidden mechanics of addiction, what's really going on in the brain, and what it means for anyone who's ever felt stuck in a cycle they can't escape. By the end of this, you won't just understand addiction better. You'll see human behavior in a whole new way. So, let's start with the big question. What is addiction really? Is it a disease? A choice? A failure of character? Well, neuroscience has made one thing very clear. Addiction isn't just a lack of willpower. It's not about being lazy or irresponsible. It's about changes in the brain. When someone becomes addicted, their brain chemistry and structure literally change.
The reward system in the brain, designed to help us survive, is hijacked. And the main player here is dopamine. You've probably heard it called the pleasure chemical, but it's more than that. Dopamine's real job is motivation. It's what pushes us toward things that feel rewarding: food, connection, achievement. When we eat something we love, get a compliment, or hit a goal, we get a hit of dopamine. And that tells our brain, do that again. It's how we're wired to learn, to grow, to survive. But addictive substances and behaviors hack this system. They flood the brain with dopamine at levels way beyond what we'd ever get naturally. Drugs like cocaine, heroin, or even nicotine don't just feel good, they feel amazing. Too good. The brain gets overwhelmed. So what does it do? It adapts. It starts dialing down its own dopamine production. It gets rid of receptors. Basically, the brain goes, "Whoa, that was too much. I can't keep up with that." And that's where the trap begins.
Now, everyday joys, talking with friends, watching your favorite show, going for a walk, don't feel good anymore, because compared to that dopamine surge, they're nothing, they're flat. And your brain starts craving the only thing that can light it up again. The drug, the drink, the scroll, the bet, even if it's destroying your life. But here's the twist. Addiction isn't just chemistry. It's also deeply emotional, psychological. A lot of people turn to addictive behaviors not because they're chasing a high, but because they're running from pain, trauma, loneliness, stress, anxiety, emotional wounds that never really healed. Research shows that people who've experienced things like neglect, abuse, or chaotic environments growing up have a much higher risk of becoming addicted later in life. It's not random. It's the brain saying, "This hurts. I need relief. And this thing gives me relief." Even if that relief is temporary, even if it comes with a cost. Think about it. How many times have you opened your phone not because you needed to, but because you were bored, uncomfortable, or anxious? That little impulse, that need to distract, that's how addiction begins in miniature. It's not just about substances, it's about patterns, about using something, anything, to avoid discomfort, to feel something different, or to feel nothing at all. And once it works, your brain remembers.
Now, here's where it gets really sneaky. People stuck in addiction often believe they're in control, that they can stop whenever they want, that they just don't want to right now. But that belief, that's part of the trap. There's actually a term for this: cognitive dissonance. It's the tension we feel when our actions don't line up with our values or beliefs. So the brain tries to resolve that tension by making excuses. I deserve this. Everyone else is doing it. I'll stop next week. I'm fine. And the cycle continues. Not because they're weak, but because their brain, trained and rewired by experience, is doing exactly what it's been taught to do. But addiction isn't just about the substance. It's also about everything around it: the environment, the routine, the associations. Someone addicted to smoking doesn't just crave nicotine, they crave the ritual, lighting up after a meal, during a break, while sitting with friends. A gambler isn't just addicted to winning money, they're hooked on the anticipation, the thrill, the chaos. These emotional and environmental triggers are like hidden wires, tying addiction to the rest of life. And when you understand that, you start to realize addiction isn't just a behavior, it's a system.
So now that we understand how addiction rewires the brain and ties itself to routines, emotions, and even environments, let's talk about something most people miss. Addiction is deeply connected to your surroundings. Your brain learns by association. It creates shortcuts, and over time, it starts to link certain people, places, and emotions with addictive behaviors. Here's a simple example. Let's say every time you feel stressed, you pour a drink. Your brain eventually learns stress equals drink. That becomes automatic. Soon, even just feeling a little overwhelmed can trigger that craving, even if you're not aware of it. That's why quitting something cold turkey doesn't always work, because even if you remove the substance, you haven't removed the trigger. And the brain? It remembers. One of the most fascinating studies about this was from the Vietnam War. During the war, a surprising number of U.S. soldiers became addicted to heroin. Military reports estimated about 20% had serious addictions. But here's the shocking part. When those soldiers came home, most of them just stopped. No rehab, no programs, no lifelong struggle. How? Because when they returned, their environment changed completely. The war zone, the fear, the trauma, that was gone. And with it, the triggers. Heroin wasn't tied to home, it was tied to war. That study revealed a huge truth. Addiction isn't just about the substance, it's about the context, the routines, the stress, the emotional patterns, the people around you.
But wait, if changing your environment can break addiction, then why do so many people relapse after rehab? Why do they move cities, cut ties, and still fall back in? The answer is because addiction isn't only about the environment, it's also about what's happening inside. And one of the biggest drivers of addiction is this: emotional pain. A lot of people aren't trying to get high or feel amazing. They're trying to feel less lonely, less anxious, less depressed, less like themselves. In that moment, the substance or the behavior isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline. That's why addiction is often called a coping mechanism gone wrong. It's not just pleasure seeking, it's pain avoidance. There's a famous study called the Rat Park experiment that illustrates this perfectly. Researchers took two groups of rats. Group 1,
isolated rats in empty cages with nothing to do. They were given two choices: plain water or water laced with morphine. They almost always picked the morphine. Some even overdosed. So, the conclusion? The drug is addictive, right? But then psychologist Bruce Alexander asked, what if it's not the drug? It's the cage.
So he created Rat Park, a big fun space for rats. Lots of toys, food, space, other rats to play with. He gave them the same two choices, plain water or drugged water. And guess what? They barely touched the drug. Why? Because they were fulfilled. They weren't in pain. They weren't lonely. They weren't trying to escape. This experiment flipped everything. It showed that addiction isn't just about chemistry. It's about connection, purpose, and emotional state. So what does this mean for humans? It means recovery isn't just about removing the addiction. It's about replacing it with something deeper, something meaningful. Here's the problem. A lot of people try to quit an addiction by focusing on stopping the behavior, but they don't build anything new to replace it. No new passions, no new relationships, no new structure, no sense of purpose. So guess what happens? They feel empty. And the brain goes, hey, remember that thing that used to make us feel better? And the cycle restarts. That's why the most effective recovery programs focus not just on abstinence, but on transformation. Studies show that people who engage in meaningful work, have strong social bonds, and feel a sense of progress or growth have a much higher success rate in overcoming addiction. They're not just stopping something, they're moving towards something. And this is a mindset shift that makes all the difference. Instead of thinking, I need to stop drinking, think, I'm becoming someone who values clarity, health, and peace. Instead of, I have to quit this behavior, think, I'm building a life where I don't need to escape. And yes, it's still hard. You'll still hit walls. But those walls become easier to climb when you're going somewhere.
Now, even when people are on the right track, many still fall into one painful trap: self-sabotage. Ever wonder why some people relapse even when things seem to be going well? Why they pull back just as they start to heal? It comes down to how the brain works. Because the brain isn't fixed. It's not stuck. It's malleable, changeable, reprogrammable. This is what scientists call neuroplasticity. Every time you choose a healthier behavior, going for a walk instead of scrolling for hours, calling a friend instead of using, it's like you're carving a new pathway in your brain. It's like hiking through a forest and creating a brand new trail. The more you walk that trail, the clearer and easier it becomes. The less you use the old one, the more it gets overgrown and harder to access. Addiction is built on repetition, but so is recovery. Now we're at the final piece of the puzzle, and honestly, this might be the most important part of all. Because even if you understand the brain, the emotions, the environment, even if you're doing everything right, there's something else that decides whether change truly lasts. It's not willpower, it's not discipline, it's identity. Yeah, how you see yourself. A lot of people try to break addiction by changing their behavior, but they never update the way they view who they are. For example, if someone says, I'm a smoker trying to quit, they're still identifying as a smoker. The addiction is still part of their identity. Even if they stop for days or even weeks, they still see themselves as someone who smokes. But if that person shifts to, I'm not a smoker anymore, suddenly everything changes. Because now, every cigarette isn't just a relapse, it's a violation of their identity. And our brains? They fight really hard to stay consistent with our identity. We don't like feeling like liars to ourselves. This is a concept called identity-based habits, and it's been studied in behavioral science for years. Here's the idea. People naturally stick to behaviors that align with how they see themselves. If you believe, "I'm a healthy person," then eating well and working out isn't a struggle. It's just part of who you are. If you believe, "I'm an addict," even unconsciously, your brain will keep dragging you back to behaviors that prove that belief true. That's why people who relapse often say things like, "I knew I'd mess this up. I never really changed. This is just who I am." They're not just words, they're identity statements. And as long as those identities stay rooted in the past, real transformation is nearly impossible.
So, how do you change your identity? It doesn't happen overnight, but it starts small. Every time you make a decision that reflects the kind of person you want to be, you're casting a vote for that identity. You're telling your brain, "This is who I am now." You're not just skipping the drink, you're becoming someone who chooses clarity. You're not just avoiding the high, you're becoming someone who values being present. And over time, those small votes start to shift your self-image. Your brain begins to rewire how it sees you. But there's one major obstacle that gets in the way of identity change, and that's shame. A lot of people who've struggled with addiction carry this enormous weight of guilt. They feel broken. They feel like they failed too many times. And that shame, it convinces them that they're not allowed to change, that they don't deserve a better identity. But here's the truth. The past doesn't define you. Neuroscience has already shown that the brain is always changing. You are not fixed. You are not stuck. Old patterns can be unlearned. New ones can be built. And your future doesn't have to be a mirror of your past.
What matters is what you do now. There's actually a powerful concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that some people don't just bounce back from trauma, they come back stronger. They take the pain, the mess, the addiction, and they use it as fuel to become something greater. They stop seeing themselves as victims and start seeing themselves as survivors. Not, "I'm broken," but "I've been through hell and I'm still standing." And that shift, it's not just emotional, it's neurological. Brain scans have shown that when people reframe their past in a positive, empowering way, new neural connections form. They literally reshape their brain's narrative. That's why therapy, journaling, mindfulness, all those tools can actually restructure how you relate to your own story. You stop seeing your past as a chain and start seeing it as your origin story. But even with that shift, there's one final ingredient that ties everything together. The most powerful force in breaking addiction and building a new life. And that's connection.
Because here's the truth. Addiction is isolation, disconnection from others, from purpose, and from your own self. And if disconnection fuels addiction, then connection is the cure. This isn't just a nice idea, it's science. Studies show that people who feel connected to their community, to loved ones, to something meaningful are far less likely to fall into addiction. That's why support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous work, not just because of the 12 steps, but because of community. People get around others who understand, who've been there, who remind them they're not alone, and that matters. When we connect with others, our brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It reduces stress, builds trust, and helps us feel safe. But connection goes beyond just other people. It's also about connecting to a sense of purpose.
Some of the most inspiring recovery stories come from people who found a mission, whether that's art, coaching, helping others, building a life they're proud of. They took the worst part of their story and turned it into their greatest strength. So if you're struggling and you feel stuck, start small. Call someone, help someone, create something. Build a life that's worth being present for. Because addiction is powerful, but human resilience, it's stronger. Thanks for watching. And if this helped you, even a little, don't forget to share it. Someone out there might need to hear it more than you think.